everyone. I'm Tamara Banks, and welcome to From Moment to Movement. So glad to have you here, and so glad to have in our presence the wonderful and talented and so spiritually energized Hank Stewart, community activist. I say community, but really almost globally impact, and Poet Laureate. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited. I laid my clothes out early so I could be here. You know, I couldn't wait. So thank you for trusting me with a little bit of your time.
Absolutely. You know, when we talk about time, the name of the show represents sort of this feeling of, really, since the pandemic and the world watched George Floyd being murdered over and over again, Breonna Taylor, countless black and brown unarmed people being killed. Then we have, like I said, the pandemic and all of these things, the rise of and evolution of Black Lives Matter. Fast forward to November 5th, 2024, and the outcome of the election is something that caught some people on their heels. And so I think it's great to have these conversations, to have sort of give people a roadmap of where do we go from here. And so I wanted to invite you and ask you about your great activism and your poetry, and to first have you give us a little bit of your background. How do you enmesh and emerge activism with poetry?
Great question. For me, poetry was an accident for me, I always say. I discovered my purpose November the 7th, 1991. I never forget the day. I was a manager at UPS, and I was working third shift. And I came home that morning and kind of pedaled around the house, folded some clothes, washed some clothes, did the dishes, took a shower, went to sleep, and I woke up around 5 o'clock, getting ready to go back to work. And I turned on the news, Tamara, and I'll never forget, the news was the news. Murder, carjacking, inflation, the typical things we heard. We were in a desert storm, war at that time. The weather came on, it was horrible that day, floods and tornadoes, it was just horrible. I'm a sports junkie. I love football, basketball, baseball, hockey, golf, talk, tennis, soccer, everything. But that day, Magic Johnson declared he was HIV positive. I had never in my life seen the news so bad. And I started doodling on a sheet of paper. And the very first poem that God ever blessed me with was a piece that's called Can You Hear Me? And it was real simple. Lord, there's times when nothing is going right. Lord, there's times I can't find anything good to talk about. Lord, there's times when I cry. I wonder, did you hear me? Lord, there's times I've fallen. And I wonder, did you see me? Can you hear me, Lord? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Just give me a sign. And very softly, he spoke to my heart. He told me about Calvary, and this is what he said. He said, Hank, do you know they slapped me across my face because I heard your cry? They pierced me in my side because I heard your cry. They spit on me because I heard your cry, and I died on a Friday because I heard your cry, and I rose on a Sunday because I heard your cry. Now, my child, you have it all simply because I heard your cry. It was the first thing that I ever wrote. And I just discovered my purpose. I had just discovered why I was here. And, Mark Twain said the two greatest days of your life are the days that you're born and the day that you realize why you were born. And I had just discovered my purpose for being here. I started doing research, and the more I started to research, particularly African-American poets, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez, Maya, Langston Hughes, Paul Laurence Dunbar, they were all involved in the movement. They all were involved in the struggle. And so I wanted to be a poet with substance, right? And so that's how I started to tie activism and poetry together, because I saw, Langston Hughes saying life ain't been no cliff, and Nikki Giovanni talking about ego tripping, and Maya Angelou and Still I Rise, and they were all entrenched in the community.
Mm-hmm. And what an amazing talent to be able to turn something, such tragic news, into something of a creative situation where you're showing the beauty of a really bad situation, or at least making it appealing for people to be willing to listen to and to hear about.
Yeah, it was just, it was, for me, it was, my pastors used to say all the time, you can't call a bad day a bad day until all the days they end, because what looked like a bad day might just be the best day. And so that was what we thought was a bad day, but for me it ended up being the best day, because now I know why. Steve Harvey said, you know, your career is what you're paid for, but your calling is what you're made for. And so I knew my calling that day, and so it was no longer a bad day, it was a day of purpose for me.
You've talked about standing on the shoulders of C.T. Vivian, Congressman John Lewis, many others. What did you glean from those brilliant minds, men and women, that sort of helps inform your poetry?
Wow. Dr. Vivian, his strength. You know, if you pull up Eye on the Prize and you can see him standing at the courthouse demanding the opportunity to vote, and get knocked down and get right back up because it was that important. Congressman John Lewis at the Edmonds Pettus Bridge, Bloody Sunday, and seeing the beating that him and Hosea Williams, Reverend Hosea Williams, took, and we don't talk enough about Reverend Hosea Williams. Dr. Joseph Echols Lowry, you know, addressing weapons of mass distractions is what he called it, not destructions, but distractions, at the funeral of the civil rights, Ms. Coretta Scott King, and what made that address so powerful was who was sitting behind him. President Bush and President Carter and all of them on the platform, and his courage enough to address weapons of mass distraction. And he said that, you know, he took a lot of criticism for death threats. And I asked him why, and he said, you know, Dr. King addressed the Vietnam War, addressing, you know, doing the eulogy of the bombing of the 4 little girls, and because the world was watching. And so to see them, and then, you know, people like Ms. Nona Clayton and Cleo Orange and Rita Samuels and so many, you know, just, I mean, Fannie Lou Hamer and so many. You can, I mean, the list is definitely not short of women who don't get the credit that they deserve during the movement, and to see their strength, you know, Gwendolyn Brooks, and just the steps that they took when it was not popular. And so, you know, we're in that time where, when I was in South Africa last year, I had an opportunity to speak, and it was a major election for them as well. And I had an opportunity to speak about 15 times in 10 days in South Africa, Joburg, Cape Town. And I told the young people there, it's our time, it's our turn, but if we don't do our part, it's our fault. And that's where we are now. We're there now in 2024 in America. It's our time, it's our turn, and if we don't do our part, it's our fault. There's a whole lot of people stood up and did it when it was their time, when it was their turn. But if you don't do your part, it's your fault. And so that's where I think we are now. And all of that strength was pulled from those civil rights legends. Dr. C.T. Vivian, I asked him, I said, you know, why did you all stand and fight so much and so hard? He said, because we knew it was our time, and we knew that our God was God. That was powerful for me. Our God is God. You know, we wasn't serving a God, but the God, but the supreme being. And so it still energizes me when I think about that.
So as we move into 2025, and as I mentioned, the election in November caught a lot of folks off guard. The hope was there for something different than what we just had in the 8 years, 4 years before that. And so how will the current election and political environment inform your poetry and activism now? And are you able to reach young people who it's their turn now to step into the spaces that we will eventually be leaving?
I still think we had to reset. There was a reset, but I still think, you know, denied doesn't mean, you know, over. And I think we have to really spend some time really refocusing. I think it's an opportunity for us to rekindle relationships. Our community, you know, we grew up and were reared in an area where, in an era where community meant something, and we kind of gotten away from that community. I think it's an opportunity to reset and get to know your neighbors, because you might have to borrow some sugar, you know, you might have to, you know, grow some crop, grow your own food to reset. But I think this is truly a time for us to get reconnected as a community and know each other, and still understand that our God is God. That, you know, at the end of the day, you know, elections don't drive God. It doesn't drive. My pastor used to say that God don't have to work by 5 o'clock Friday. You know, we can. It's still, we're not. You know, the world doesn't revolve about who's in the White House, but who's in charge of turning the leaves, you know, without a calendar. You know, the seasons and when you go around and you start to look at truly God's creation, you know that it's bigger than the White House, you know, and so.
What are you hearing from younger people today, millennials and Gen Z? Are they encouraged, discouraged? Do they see civil rights and human rights with the same lens that, you know, Dr. King, John Lewis, and many others did?
I think so. I think that they might be using their platforms a little bit different, but they see the same type, because, you know, a lot of young people registered a lot of young people to vote. They believe in it. And let's be clear, you know, even in the civil rights movement, it was not everybody in the movement. You know, there were civil and human rights, you know, there were, during that movement, there were pastors who were not a part of the movement. You know, a lot of people jumped on board when Dr. King was assassinated, but they were not there. You know, the letter in the Birmingham jails addressed some of those issues of people who did not and were not a part of the movement, right? Dr. King's popularity, let's be clear, his popularity was less than 40%, I think in the mid-30s when he was assassinated. So he became very popular after his assassination, but he wasn't, you know, a lot of people didn't trust him in their pulpit. You know, so we have a tendency to think that the movement was about the masses, and it really was a small group back then, and I think it's going to still be a small group now who moves us forward, and that commitment, those committed folk, right, who are committed to seeing that all of us have the rights to good health care and education and things of that nature. So it's never been the masses.
You've said that history and spirituality will move us to new heights, and you speak very freely about God, which is great. In terms of history, if our kids aren't being taught, if white kids aren't being taught about black people from Africa being enslaved, how immigrants have contributed, how do we hold on to the storytelling and the history when top policymakers, governors, senators, just people even on the community level are talking about, let's whitewash, literally whitewash the history of colored folks, and let's just move on?
Well, I didn't learn to pray at church. I didn't learn my ABCs at school, right? I learned that at home. My mom taught us, my dad taught us to pray. I remember, you know, my aunts and uncles would come over, and my mom has taught us, you know, at 2 and 3 years old, teaching us our ABCs and colors, and she'd have us performing for my aunt and uncles. Say your ABCs, and you know, A, B, C, D, 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 E. You're messing it up, but she was teaching us at home. When we got to school, it was re-emphasized, and I think we're going to have to get back to that. Our history can be taught at home. Those conversations, you're going to have those conversations around the table with your children, talking about not only the greats, but your own history, your own family history. Most of our families are all of our families are very rich. I mean, we come from good stock. No, we come from great stock. I'm sorry, Tamara, we come from the best of stock. And to have been here, only the strong survive. You talk about those journeys over, only the strong survive. So you are strong just by your lineage, you know, who you come from, what survived. Imagine all of the generations that did not make it. So to be here now says I'm not average. You know, I come from good stock. I come from great stock. I come from the best of stock.
Absolutely. And to your point about, I was just talking to one of my cousins yesterday about, now was that the second cousin or she from dad's side or dad? And we really have to do a better job, at least as good a job as our parents, if not our grandparents did, about staying connected. Um,
Family reunions should be even more important. You know, having your family reunions, and the beauty of family reunions, it starts connecting that you might be a part of my family. You know, it starts to connect us, and there's, you know, and I just think we got to do a better job of that. You know, and we're planning our family reunion right now in 2024 for 2025. You know, and 2026, you're looking at where we're going to host them, and in those, you know, that you have to tell those stories. You have to show the history. You have to show. And celebrate. You have to celebrate. We got a lot of successes in my family. We have to celebrate those success stories, and pay great, you know, homage to our grandparents and great grandparents and great grandparents, and talk about some of the things. And so my sister, she's no longer here, but she was doing our family tree, and so we can go back to the late 1700s. Because she was able to find grandparents and things that she did that and left that knowledge, and we have that, and we have even on social media, and I think you have to be careful that, because that can be deleted, but even on social media, how we're all connected, you know, and so we celebrate birthdays, we celebrate marriages, and we mourn together losses, you know, and graduations and promotions and jobs, and so we do that. And because we have about 100 and something people on our Facebook page. And so when somebody gets, kids graduate and go to college, everybody's, you know, and we might all, you know, think about if everybody just send everybody $1, you know, every time a child, you know, you got 100 and something, that child, and it's not an exorbitant amount of money, but it shows some level of celebration. So we're trying to do little things like that in our family.
Mm-hmm. We have to. And if we know where we've come from, we have a sense of where we're going.
Exactly.
And so many young people in particular feel disconnected because they don't know our ancestors. The name of the show is From Moment to Movement. And is there, as we sort of wrap up, what kinds of takeaways can you give folks about when we think about, we're in this moment of the, people are aware now, they can't say, I didn't know, you know, my neighbor was stopped just because he was in the wrong neighborhood, just because he was black. I didn't know this. Now we know. What can people do, black and white, to sort of capture this moment and see if we can shift into more of a movement?
I want to go back just a little bit. I think we have to remember that a lot that has happened is not the first time it happened. When you talk about a Trayvon Martin or a George Floyd, you have to remember Emmett Till. You know, there's so much history. When you look at Colin Kaepernick, you have to remember there was a Muhammad Ali who did the same thing, right? And so I think too often, because we're not talking historically, it seems like some of these things are the first time happening, and they're not. And so we have to have these real conversations. You know, one thing that I really admire about the Jewish community, their children know about the Holocaust. They don't shy away from that. You know, their kids know about it, and we have very rich history, but we don't sometimes want to talk about it. And I think we have to be intentional about having these conversations. It's not a cute conversation, right? But it's an important conversation. They're intentional, and you know, I often say, if you put a child at a table and you put broccoli, carrots, and things in front of them, and then you put Cheetos and Oreo cookies and give them a choice of what they're going to eat, they're quite naturally going to go towards the things that's not healthy. But you as a parent know that they need that broccoli, they need those carrots, they need, you know, the greens, they need the, you know, the colorful plate, as we say. And I think we have to, as parents, understand that it's not a sexy conversation to have, but it's an intentional conversation we need to have with our children. And if we do that, they'll get it. My son is so interesting. My son now has a strong appreciation for our history because he was reared in that. He was reared going to, you know, civil and human rights. I had the fortune of working for Reverend Jesse Jackson for 5 years. And so when he was growing up, he was in the office with us, and, you know, and so he knew about the Hosea Williams. I got pictures, and I would put him in the middle of a picture with Ambassador Andrew Young, and have a picture with him and Harry Belafonte talking, and I took that picture intentionally, Rosa Parks, so we have to be very intentional. My son is just as excited about civil and human rights people as he is about athletes and entertainers, right? Because it was intentional, very intentional. So we have to be intentional about who we put our children around.
Right. We have to have those difficult conversations, and we have to eat our broccoli.
We have to eat our broccoli. We have to.
Vegetarian.
We have to.
Thank you all for joining us. I'm Tamara Banks with From Moment to Movement. We'll see you next time for another episode.